Just the fact that the OKC Thunder landed big man Isaiah Hartenstein, who's considered the top available free agent big man this offseason, already changes the narrative for a franchise that's never really been a top NBA free agent destination. But when you look into his contract in more detail, the more you see how much of a steal this acquisition actually was for the Thunder. Well, OKC signed Hartenstein to a 3-year deal worth $87 million, which at first glance might actually look like an overpay for a role player. But first and foremost, the fact that the third and final year of Hartenstein's deal is actually a team option is already a huge win, as it allows OKC to have flexibility in the summer of 2026, which is when max extensions for Chet Holgmgren and J-Dub will start to kick in. Plus, the fact that Hartenstein's contract is front-loaded with most of his money coming during the first 2 years also makes a lot of sense for OKC, because it's during these next 2 years when the team would really have a lot of salary cap room available to use anyway. Then when you dive deeper and you start to look into his on-court production, the thought that Hartenstein just might actually be worth all that money starts to hit you, as the 26-year-old big man just came fresh off a breakout year in New York where he averaged 7.8 points, 8.3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, more than a steal, and more than a block per game in 25 minutes per contest, which numbers would even be higher if it didn't come off the bench during the first 2 months of the season. Nonetheless, Hartenstein thrived in a bigger role for the Knicks, shooting more than 66% from the field in 49 games as a starter, with the team having a 32-17 win-loss record in those games. On the offensive end, Hartenstein scored on a lot of putbacks, he acted as a playmaking hub, and he set hard screens for Jalen Brunson as part of the two-man game that served as the engine of the NBA's number 7 ranked offense. But more importantly, Hartenstein also served as the backline rim protector for the Knicks' top 10 defense. In fact, Hartenstein was one of only 5 players to record more than 80 blocks and 80 steals last season, a list which includes elite defensive bigs like Jaren Jackson Jr., Anthony Davis, and Victor Wembanyama. Well, even the advanced numbers love Hartenstein, as the defensive box plus-minus and the defensive estimated plus-minus metrics also paint him as either the third or the second most impactful defender in the entire NBA last season, regardless of position. So what's good everyone, it's Real Balls here, and in this video, let's talk more about how the acquisition of Isaiah Hartenstein potentially just made the OKC Thunder the favorites to come out of the Western Conference next season. So let's get to it. Overall, the big question revolves on how Isaiah Hartenstein fits on a Thunder team that already has an elite center in Chet Holmgren. Well, sure, most people would say that you can't pay someone $87 million to come off the bench to probably play just around 18 minutes per game. But I think OKC doesn't operate with their rosters conventionally anyway, and I think Hartenstein still mainly comes off the bench where he functions as a high minutes backup big. But either way, depending on the lineups they face, he and Chet Holmgren should still be sharing the floor, which would put Chet at the 4th spot in certain situations. And there's definitely massive potential in that 2 big man combination, especially on the defensive end, as the Thunder are now primed to have a wide-bodied center in Hartenstein to defend those massive bigs like Jokic and Embiid. Well, sure, Hartenstein is by no means an instant stopper against the best NBA bigs, as he somehow struggled guarding Joel Embiid in last season's playoffs. But still, OKC can pretty much rely on his ability to protect the paint against anyone else. In fact, last season, opponents only shot 52.5% when Hartenstein was the nearest defender at the rim, which is the 5th best defensive mark among all 113 players to contest at least 200 shots from that area, putting him only behind Joel Embiid, Rudy Gobert, Kristaps Porzingis, and Chet Holmgren. Now, the crazy thing is, with the Thunder already having Hartenstein to defend big bodies in the paint, they can also simultaneously deploy Chet Holmgren as perhaps the NBA's most overqualified shot-blocking help-side defender, who can just roam around the floor and basically come out of nowhere to alter shots as the Thunder's last line of defense. Well, obviously, when he's sharing the floor with Hartenstein, placing Chet at the 4th spot defensively makes sense, because he's mobile enough to guard quicker forwards in the perimeter. But I think Hartenstein isn't just gonna be limited to a stationary defensive role in the paint as well, because although he's not as quick twitch on defense as Chet, he's still got above average foot speed as well as solid recovery instincts for a big man, which should allow OKC to deploy him on different types of ball screen coverages and even some switches in the perimeter. Just like in this play, you can see Hartenstein initially guarding Okongwu on the block. The side ball screen from Okongwu forces Hartenstein to ice Bogdanovic momentarily, but as Okongwu rolls to the basket, watch how quickly Hartenstein recovers to the paint to stifle Okongwu right at the rim. This time, Hartenstein actually guards J-Dub from the perimeter. The jab step opens up the driving lane for J-Dub as he initially gets some separation, but Hartenstein uses his mobility and timing to still catch J-Dub with a block at the rim. Obviously, OKC can always go back to a 5-out and all-switch lineup, which features a combination of Shai, Caruso, Lu Dort, J-Dub, Cason Wallace, and Chet Holmgren. But as you can see, Hartenstein isn't immobile on the defensive end either, and his addition just gives OKC a safety spot against certain big lineups. He can be deployed as the team's sole big man in certain situations, but he can also be a nice frontcourt partner for either one of Chet or J-Will when they're on the floor. Also, last season, we've seen how OKC was willing to give up some edge on the rebounding area with their lack of interior size in exchange for enhancing their floor spacing by playing 5-out. Well, Hartenstein won't be a floor spacer for OKC, at least not as a volume shooter I think, but he definitely would help them increase their rebounding percentages. He is a competitive rebounder who finished in the top 20 of rebounding percentage over the past 2 years, but most notably, Hartenstein thrives on the offensive glass as a putback machine. Last season, he grabbed 14.4% of his teammates' missed shots, which is the second highest offensive rebounding rate in the entire NBA, only behind Clint Capella. But for sure, Hartenstein's offensive impact for OKC won't just be limited to scoring off putbacks and securing second-chance opportunities. Hartenstein is also a savvy playmaker who has an advanced passing vision and feel for a big man. Well, OKC as a team already have plenty of good passers, but after the loss of Josh Giddey, I think Hartenstein might be the best playmaker on the roster right now relative to position. Last season, he dished out 5 assists per 100 possessions, which ranks as the 12th best mark among all centers to play at least 1,000 minutes on the floor. Plus, Hartenstein's playmaking brilliance is also supported by the eye test. In this possession, you can see Hartenstein acting as the ball screener for OG Anunoby. He rolls to the paint, but as soon as Cat helps on him, he knows that he now has an open guy on the weak side, so he makes the right read and makes the kick out pass to Julius Randle, who now has a wide open shot on the corner. This time, you can see Hartenstein as a hub on the high post. He gets the pass from Brunson, and although he doesn't get the handoff in time, he waits for that slight window where Brunson gets ahead of his man, which is when he makes that precise bounce pass, setting up Brunson for the tough finish at the basket. Well, Mark Daignault is one of the most creative offensive minds in the NBA right now, and I think he'll find ways to feature Hartenstein's playmaking out of the mid or the high post in probably a more 4-out offense they can deploy at times, as opposed to the 5-out lineups that OKC relied upon almost exclusively last season. But there are more ways to feature Hartenstein in OKC's offense. Again, he probably won't space the floor for the Thunder, but Hartenstein is a strong finisher in the paint. He's constantly flirted with a 70% shooting mark at the rim the past 2 seasons, and he's particularly efficient from the short mid-range, where he loves to deploy his go-to push floater on the way to producing an elite 54% shooting mark from within 10 to 12 feet of the basket last season. And against Philly in the 2024 playoffs, when shooting those floaters mostly as a counter against the 76ers drop coverage, Hartenstein actually shot 65% on a total of 20 attempts. So in OKC, it should be easy to imagine Shai and J-Dub knifing into the paint and hitting Hartenstein with drop-off passes where he could finish with those floater shots. Although for sure, compared to the defensive end, there's more uncertainty on the offensive side of the ball when playing Hartenstein alongside Chet Holmgren. Well sure, having a pair of dynamic screeners in Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren will be a luxury for OKC's ball handlers. Hartenstein will be their traditional steamrolling big man to the paint, while Chet will continue to torch defenses off the pick and pop. The only thing is, while Chet is a more than capable and a more than willing 3-point shooter who shot 37% from deep last season on almost 5 attempts per game, his percentages actually started to drop as defenses paid more attention to his shot towards the end of the season. But now, during those times when he would have to share the floor with Hartenstein, who's a non-shooter, Chet would definitely have to be more consistent with his 3-point shot to prevent teams from cheating off him to instead help guard Shai and J-Dub on their drives to the basket. In addition, Chet's ball handling and agility were also huge advantages for him as the 5, but it would be interesting to see how he would scale up on his shot making from the perimeter. In those moments he will have to play the 4 spot, with Hartenstein clogging the paint as the team center. Well, even as a Thunder fan, I don't really think Hartenstein will improve OKC's offense dramatically during the regular season, but in the playoffs, having options is everything, and Hartenstein just gives OKC a new look for playoff defenses to worry about. Well, he and Chet Holgmgren will probably only share the court for a handful of minutes in each half, but depending on the opponent, OKC can adjust on a night-to-night basis. If it turns out that there's a compatibility problem with a double big man frontcourt, they can always go with either one as the solo big out on the floor. But overall, OKC will now have the luxury of mixing and matching whatever parts they need. And I think the best part about a Hartenstein acquisition is that there isn't nearly as much opportunity cost as such a huge contract usually incurs. OKC's cap sheet is so clean, and they also have a treasure chest of draft assets and players that they could still be major players in the trade market if they ever choose to. And just like with the Boston Celtics, it's hard to find holes in the roster that OKC already has right now. The additions of Hartenstein and Caruso this summer, as well as the re-signings of critical role players Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, have simply turned OKC into the best team in the Western Conference. No one on paper is better equipped to go toe-to-toe with the Boston Celtics next season. But for sure, it all begins with how Isaiah Hartenstein changes the dynamic for the OKC Thunder's lineup construction from this point on, and depending on how quickly OKC reaches their ceiling as a team, this massive contract for a role player might even be seen as one of the greatest value deals in the NBA in a few years. But what do you guys think about the Isaiah Hartenstein acquisition for OKC? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this is Real Balls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.